If a controller asks you something, you know, so a controller says Alpha Bravo Charlie, join left base, report over, report joining left base. All right, so you're cleared left base, report joining. Don't say Roger. Roger just says, I've heard your message.
I see.
Wilco is will comply, or just say your ident, Alpha Bravo Charlie. That's okay too. But if you just say Roger, all that Roger means is, yeah, I heard you. Wilco will comply, or
Wilco.
just use your ident. Okay.
Right.
If you don't understand something, you know, our radios are not the best in these light aircraft. Don't hesitate to ask for a repeat. It could be critical safety information. So if you really don't understand what you've said, what has been said because of radio quality, then ask the person to repeat, ask the controller to repeat. Say again. Now, if they've given you 5 pieces of information and the only thing you missed was one, don't ask them to say all of it again. Just say, ask them to, could you say again the altimeter, please? Or could you say again the position of the traffic? And if you don't understand what they're asking, then just ask them to, can you clarify? You know, sometimes, for example, well, I'll get into this in the next one about reporting points, but if you're not sure what they're asking you, then just ask, could you clarify? You know, don't assume you understand and then do the wrong thing. The best words to say if you're not familiar is, I'm unfamiliar, because if you're unfamiliar, the controller will bend over backwards to help you. So for example, you come to Ottawa and they say report over Bell's Corners and you have no idea where Bell's Corners is. Don't just say Wilco or give your ident. Say, sorry, I'm not familiar with Bell's Corners, and they'll give you a different reporting point. On the airport, sometimes you could be on an airport you're not familiar with the taxiway layout. So you could say, I'm unfamiliar with the taxiway layout, give me progressive taxi. So instead of saying taxi via Alpha Bravo Charlie, Echo 1, Delta 2, you know, Charlie 3, then he'll say, okay, take the second exit, turn left, first exit, turn right, and I'll give you further from there. So again, they'll help you. They'd much prefer you say you're unfamiliar than have you act like you know what you're doing and you don't, and then, you know, you make a mistake. When you get traffic information, it's really important for the controller to know, are you looking for the traffic or do you have the traffic in sight? If you're looking, say it, you know, the control gives you traffic, o'clock position, distance, and direction of flight. You say, you know, looking, or no contact on the traffic, or I have the traffic in sight. Once you have the traffic in sight, it's up to you to separate yourself from that other aircraft. Don't expect ATC to separate. Especially if you're in Class D or in Class E airspace, which is by a flight service specialist. So these are just some things that you can, that will help you in communicating. Finally, I want to talk about emergency services. So for some reason, pilots appear to be reluctant about communicating with controllers when they're having difficulty. And that could be anything. It could be that you're lost. You know, pilots are never lost. They're just not sure of their position. You know, so you may be a little bit disoriented. So it's okay to say, you know, like you're on the, you know, you're on radar or you're talking to the tower. I can't see the airport from my position. Can you point it out to me? Or I'm not sure of my position. It happened to me once. I was flying and I was going into Winchester Airport, south of Ottawa. It wasn't visible to me, and I hadn't been in there before. So I actually asked the controller if he could give me sort of a radio DME type of thing, so I could help locate it. Or I told him I was on this radio on this DME, so he could help me. So you can help them find you if you're not on transponder, but you can also ask them for help to find where you're going. So if you're lost or disoriented, don't hesitate, especially if you're coming into an airport that's controlled. Maybe the weather is hazy, maybe you're not familiar with it, and you just don't see it. Ask. Okay, that's great about GPS. You can use a direct to help you get there. But if you don't know, ask. If you're low on fuel, tell the controller. Maybe they're going to hold you, or maybe they're going to extend you, or because of other traffic. If you're low on fuel, tell them, because they want you to get on the ground safely. If you're having aircraft problems, I remember one time I was flying from Rockcliffe to Kingston with a student. She was doing her dual cross country. And we were just south of Carp Airport, over the area of lakes in that area. And we started to get a rough running engine. We were 4,500 feet southwestbound. So we figured it was carb heat. We applied carb heat, but even with carb heat on, it was still running rough. We started to descend and we started to turn back towards the nearest airport, which is Carp. And I called the center because we were on flight following. I told them what was going on. So anyway, they said, great, let us know if you need any help. And actually, by the time we got down to about 3,000 feet, the engine was running smoothly. So I actually said to the controller, well, we may just continue back to Rockcliffe. He said, something, I really think you ought to land at Carp or at Carp. So we did, we did. Anyway, it turns out it was just carburetor racing, and we did the trip another time. But they can provide help. They can provide, if it's a radar environment, which you will normally have in the center or terminal or some towers, they can give you radar vectors. But that may not always be possible because you may be too low to be in radar. The farther you are away from the radar source, the higher you have to be. So it's possible that if you really, really, really need radar vectors and you're in an area that should have radar coverage, but you're not on radar, it's possible that the tower or the center will ask you to climb higher if you can. Obviously, you wouldn't go into clouds. But there is another form of of emergency assistance that you can be provided, although it's there's not much of it now, or not many of these available, and that's what's called a DF steer, direction finding steer. So I just want to look at, here's an example of the CFS for Muskoka. So a few things I just want to mention. I'm not very good graphically, so I couldn't show you this part of the what's in the CFS. But if you were to look at Muskoka in the CFS, you'll see there's the 5-mile ring that designates this as Class E airspace. So that's where you would find it, is in the aerodrome diagram. If it is E, C, or D, there will normally have the dimensions of the control zone with the type of airspace that's there. Of course, you've got all your information services, runway, etc. But what I wanted to do is bring you down here to the comms section. So first, notice it's an MF, mandatory frequency. It's Timmins radio. Now, obviously, Timmins isn't in Muskoka, but this particular Muskoka is actually, they provide, Timmins radio provides remote airport advisory services. And so that's why you're talking to Timmins radio and why it's an MF. So that's something important to know. And then you notice here you've got VDF, that's VHF direction finding. So they can give that to you on 122.3. So let's say you were flying to Muskoka and you couldn't find the airport there. You could ask Timmins Radio for a DF steer. This is a most recent example here. I actually took a screenshot or a picture off my ForeFlight. So this was the most up-to-date information from Muskoka. So it's under the comms that you will find MF, but also you'll find out if there's a VDF service, and how that works is you simply transmit Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie. The FSS gets a bearing of where you are relative to the radio transmitter, and using that information is able to direct you via heading, give you a heading to the airport. I actually used a VDF steer one time to save a pilot's life when I was up in Sept-Îles. It was a float plane. He was in cloud. He was a float plane. He couldn't land on the ground. In Sept-Îles, we were walks off, indefinite ceiling 0, obscured 0 in fog. But I got him out over the St. Lawrence River, which at that point is 85 miles across. So I knew there was water underneath him. And he circled down and he landed on the water. But it was thanks to the VDF steer. So that's really all I wanted to do on ATC. And so I'm going to move into another section. But before I do, maybe I can just ask if you have any questions. I went through that reasonably fast, but I'm sure some of you are very experienced and maybe know a lot of that stuff already. And for others, it may have been, good tips. So, but I'll open it up for questions.
Kathy, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm a fairly new pilot, and I trained uncontrolled, so I've only landed at a controlled airport like a handful of times. And one of the things that I was unsure of was if I do a touch and go at London, let's say, and after they clear me for the touch and go, they say right hand turnout.
Hmm.
Does that command, or I guess when they say right hand turnout, does that only allow me to climb to circuit height? Like I can't
No,
climb to
no,
my.
no. Okay. So two things. If they tell you turn right, um, it will depend on the circumstance. If they want you to turn right because there's traffic landing the opposite direction, then you want to do it when it's safe to do so, but you don't want to climb unnecessarily straight out. So they should know where you're going. But when they say turn right after takeoff, means that when you judge it to be safe and legal, which normally should be at least 500 feet above ground, then you can make the right turn on course. Um, but if it's an uncontrolled airport, you can't do that. You have to climb straight out until you're clear of the circuit geographically or vertically. If you don't want to turn right at 500 feet, you want to turn right at 1500 feet, that's okay, but you might tell them, I'm going to climb straight out to 1500 before starting my right turn.
But I can't at the controlled airport. I can't go higher than circuit altitude. I have to level off at circuit altitude, and
No,
then they'll
no,
clear me
no,
further to
no,
climb to like
no, no,
4,000.
no, no. Once you're cleared
Okay.
for takeoff, unless they give you an altitude restriction, then as long as you're operating in their airspace, you can climb to the altitude that is their control zone. So let me give you an example here. Gatineau Airport, and because I don't know London very well, I'd have to look at it. So Gatineau Airport is their ceiling, their limit is 2,500 feet. So it's probably, no, I'm not going to use that because it's a flight service station. Let me use Ottawa Airport. So if Ottawa Tower clears me for takeoff and they say, clear for takeoff runway 22, after takeoff, turn right and proceed on course. That means I can climb up to whatever altitude you want, but not into the terminal controlled airspace. So they will probably give you a restriction, like not above 2000. So take off runway 22, turn right, not above 2000, and contact terminal control in the air, because above 2000, you're getting into terminal control's airspace. So it all depends on the geometry of the airport. If they're in Ottawa, and I don't know London well enough, if they're embedded within another terminal control area, they may give you a restriction. If they don't give you a restriction, then you're clear to climb to your flight plan altitude and to turn on course at your discretion. It was a long answer, but I hope it answered your question.
Yeah, no, it did. Thank you. I thought I couldn't climb out when I wanted, so that's good to know.
Unless they restrict you. And as long as you're not climbing into some other airspace that is controlled by another unit. But I don't think that's the case in London. I don't think that's the case in London. Any other questions?
Kathy, I'll just jump in about London. There is no ceiling over it, and half of London is right-hand pattern.
Okay. Okay.
So if someone popped by to do a touch and go, they might be giving you a right turnout in case you're unfamiliar with the circuit direction.
Okay, well, that's a good point too. But the point is that when you are at a controlled airport with a tower, at an uncontrolled airport, you're supposed to climb straight ahead after departure until you are geographically or vertically clear of the circuit. At a controlled airport, you don't have to. You can turn after takeoff, but they will tell you, right turn after takeoff, left turn after takeoff, if they need to specify. Same thing, by the way, at an airport with a flight service station. So I'm departing Gatineau and I want to turn right. I don't have to get permission. But if Gatineau didn't have a flight service station, I would. Thanks, Evie.
Kathy, it's Janice. I've got about 300 hours and I fly my own 182 out of Brantford. So we've been doing lots of flights with lower traffic through Toronto quite a bit. So I have one kind of comment question and then one question about Kingston. So we've noticed going through Toronto now that, people are passing you off from terminal to tower. And sometimes it actually sounds like I'm talking to the same person. on a lower traffic day, and just kind of wondering about the setup of that. And then the second thing is that in Kingston, we were basically, it was a very busy day. We were trying to take off, and my husband is a retired search and rescue pilot with lots of hours. So we were kind of being told that we had to wait on the ground, waiting for traffic to come in, where had we been making our own decision, we would have known we had lots of time to get out before the traffic was coming in. But it's not a control tower. So if we had just decided to go, what might have happened?
So I'll answer the second question first, then I'll go back to the first one. So in a flight service station, they can hold aircraft short of the runway.
They can. So I
Yes.
have to listen to that.
Yeah,
Okay.
they can hold you short of the runway.
I made
So
us. I made a stop because I'm the, I'm the
Yeah,
PIC, but we
Yeah.
certainly had an interesting discussion about it afterwards.
Yeah, no, they can hold you short of the runway if and you can you can challenge their judgment about your ability to get out ahead of the aircraft or not. But I'm just saying that they do have the ability or the right, the authority, I guess is a better word, to hold you short of the runway. But that's all, and that's just to prevent runway incursions.
Okay.
Okay. Now, with respect to Toronto, I think quite honestly, the drop off in traffic for NAV Canada has been extreme, and I've heard lots of anecdotal stories, people flying, and the tower saying, "Come on here, come and do a touch and go." Like, they're bored, they want to talk to somebody.
Yeah, we've gotten pretty close to Calgary and Toronto both this year. Like
yeah,
really
yeah. But just to be clear, in the control tower, they may have more than one air position. So they sometimes in large towers they have they'll split the control zone into two pieces with two different frequencies, and one controller will control one piece of the control zone, and another controller will control another piece of the control zone. And if they're not that busy, then one controller will do both. So you'll change frequencies, but it's the same person. But if you're talking to terminal, like the terminal control unit, that's in the area control center in Toronto, and they don't do the same job. So it would be unlikely, unless there was some sort of special delegation of airspace between the tower and the terminal, that you would have the same individual. If one is a true terminal approach controller and the other one is a tower controller in Toronto, they're working physically in two different buildings.
Okay. Thank you.
Unless, as I said, they can make special arrangements, like the Toronto Tower could give airspace to Toronto Terminal. Toronto Terminal could maybe delegate some airspace to Toronto Tower, but they're still physically in two different buildings. Any other questions? Okay. We can always come back if but was there another question?
I just had a quick one. I'm Amy. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Amy.
Sorry, my camera's not working.
It's okay. I can't hardly see anybody anyway, so it's okay.
Okay, perfect. So I fly out of Thunder Bay, and we're a Class D control zone. And I was just wondering your thoughts on comm failures. If one were to happen outside the control zone, just because I've heard different thoughts on this, because we're sort of remote, there's not a ton of other options. Are you able, because it's like it would be the case of an emergency, to enter the zone without communications, or would you have to land elsewhere because of that Class D?
So that would really much depend on the availability of other airports suitable for you to land at. Class D, you're supposed to establish two-way communications before you enter, but if you can't because of a radio failure, and you feel that that's the only place to go, then you declare your little emergency to yourself because you can't talk on the radio. And you go in and you overfly the airport until you hopefully get a light allowing you to come in and land, and you watch the traffic. And then you explain afterwards. If your flights are done through like a school or a company there, usually they put arrangements into place to cover off those situations, and the students and the pilots that fly there are made aware of that. But if you're a transient pilot, you're just flying in there, that's a whole different ballgame. But you know, you got to do what you got to do and stay safe. And if there isn't any other place, then that's why they have light signals. So,
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
all right. What I'm going to suggest, just looking at the
Wouldn't you be looking, if you were in a tower, wouldn't you be hoping someone would squawk 7600 if you had a comms failure?
Well, yes, and that's a
If
good
you could.
point. That's a good point, but not all the towers have radar, and I don't know what Thunder Bay has. Now, presumably, maybe it does. Absolutely. No, if you have, if you know the tower has a radar and it's a comm failure, not something else, then no, that's a really good point that I should have added. But you need to know, A, that there's a radar, and B, you need to know your transponder is working. And then if it is, then absolutely squawk 7600. And then at least they know you're coming. But I was thinking more in the situation of you don't have communications, you don't have radar, and you don't have a transponder, or you have an electrical failure and your transponder is not working. So those sorts of situations. Okay, I'm going to move along here just because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. But if you have any more ATC questions, we can come back to them at the end, and then I can go off screen and look at you all while we're talking.